I spent 31 years in an army band, and I know the sound a room makes when it has already decided. It is a particular silence, not the waiting kind, not the listening kind, the kind that has locked its doors from the inside and hung a sign that says, "Not for you." That was the sound of the Alderton Civic Music Hall. The afternoon I watched a 22-year-old groundskeeper from the northern reservation sit down at a Steinway concert grand and play the room back open. I should give you the shape of things first. The hall had just been refurbished, new seat cushions, new light rigs. The old Buzzendorfer retired and a full concert Steinway brought in on the city's arts endowment money. The reopening gala was 2 weeks away, and Director Constance Farrow had called a small committee session that afternoon. 3 board members, herself and me, invited as a patron and former musician to offer an opinion on the hall's new acoustic character. We were seated in the 5th row, notepads on our knees, while a technician ran a microphone line across the stage. There was no audience. No performer had been booked for the session. It was meant to be a housekeeping afternoon. The boy arrived because the hall's head of facilities had asked him to replace a stuck wheel on the piano's caster. A mundane repair, 15 minutes work. He came in through the side door in a canvas work jacket, dark-haired, unhurried, carrying a small tool case. He was lean, quiet-faced, and he moved through the hall the way a person does when they know they are invisible and have made a kind of peace with it. I noticed him only because 31 years of watching a bandstand teaches you to notice everything that enters a room. He crouched beside the piano. He worked without looking up. One of the board members, Aldred Coyne, a silver-haired man who had been on the endowment committee since before I remember, leaned toward Constance Farrow and said it in a perfectly audible voice. "What's the boy doing in here during a session? He doesn't belong here." Constance Farrow did not lower her voice either. "Facility sent him. He'll be done in a moment," the boy heard. Course he heard. He did not look up, but I saw his hands slow, just for a second, before they resumed their work. He finished the repair, the caster, rolled the piano an inch to confirm it moved freely. Then he stood, closed his tool case, and did a thing I was not expecting. He looked at the piano the way a man looks at something he has loved from a long distance. A complete, private, unguarded look, the kind that lasts half a second and contains a whole life. "May I?" he said. He addressed no one in particular. He was looking at the keys. Coyne made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Constance Farrow studied the boy for a moment. I believe she was calculating whether it would take longer to send him away than to let him play a single bar and be done with it. "If you must," she said, in the tone of someone opening a door they don't expect to need to open wide. He sat. He settled on the bench with a naturalness that stopped me. Not the theatrical settling of a performer finding his moment. A simpler thing. Person arriving somewhere familiar. He spread his hands on his knees. Once, quietly, the way you might breathe before something that matters. Place them on the keys. He began with Dvořák, the slow movement of the second cello concerto transcription that almost no one plays, which I recognized before the 3rd bar, and which made me sit forward in my chair without choosing to. It was not the technically polished rendition of a conservatory student. It was something stranger and more particular. A reading with a quality of patience in it, as though the boy understood the music's grief from the inside out, and had no need to demonstrate that understanding. He simply let it be there. The phrasing was long and unhurried, the dynamic so naturally shaped that it seemed to breathe of its own accord. Coyne had opened his mouth to say something. He did not say it. Then, at the point where the Dvořák melody would have resolved, the boy did not resolve it. He held the final phrase a beat past its ending. Not an error, but a door held open, and from that threshold he walked quietly into something else. What came next was not Dvořák. I do not know what language music is in when it does not have a name yet. I know it when I hear it. The left hand took up a slow, patient ostinato. Not a classical bass pattern, but something older in its bones. Pulse that belonged to open ground and high sky rather than a concert hall. And the right hand moved above it in long, spare phrases, each one arriving the way a thought arrives, when a person is honest enough to think it fully before they speak. There was a melody in there, threaded through, that I could not have sung back but which I felt I had always known. It had the quality of something that had existed before the room did. The acoustic of the new hall took it and held it. Board members had stopped moving. Coyne had set down his notepad. I became aware at some point that my own hands had closed around the arms of my seat, and I had not noticed them doing it. It was not showy. There was no cresting climax, no moment designed to catch a gasp. The boy played as though there were no committee in the fifth row, no Steinway to impress, no door he needed to unlock. He played with the focused, unhurried authority of a person who has had a very long conversation with silence and has learned from it exactly what needs to be said. The phrases rose, stretched, and resolved with a logic that had nothing to do with the textbooks and everything to do with something he carried privately, something that had been there long before this afternoon, long before the hall, long before Aldred Coyne had decided he didn't belong. Heard concert pianists play. I have sat inside the military band for 3 decades and heard some of the finest players this country has, produced in rehearsal and on the road. What I heard from this boy in a canvas work jacket on an otherwise empty stage in the late afternoon light of a civic hall that smelled of new varnish, I do not have a precise word for it. Talent is too small, skill misses the point. It had the quality of a private truth made suddenly and briefly audible in a shared room, which is, I suppose, the only real definition of music I have ever trusted. He ended quietly. The final phrase descended to a single note, held until the room absorbed it, then lifted his hands from the keys and rested them on his knees. He sat for a moment with his head slightly bowed, the way a man does when he has said something that cost him something, then silence. The real kind this time. Not the locked kind, the opened kind. I was the first to stand. I am an old man and I am past caring what anyone thinks of me, and it was not a decision so much as a fact that happened to my body. Coyne was beside me within a second, which surprised me. The 2 other board members followed. We were on our feet in the 5th row of an otherwise empty civic hall, applauding a 22-year-old in a jacket who had come in to fix a wheel on a caster. Constance Farrow did not stand immediately. I watched her. She remained in her seat for perhaps 3 or 4 seconds, after the rest of us were standing. Not from coldness, I think, from something more difficult. The look of a person recalibrating, quietly and privately, a calculation they had been confident in an hour ago. Her face held an expression I have seen on the faces of great musicians when they hear something they were not prepared to hear. Not embarrassment, something more honest than that. Then she rose. She rose slowly and deliberately, the way a person does when they want the action to mean something. She brought her hands together with the rest of us. When the applause ended, she walked to the edge of the stage. The boy had stood. He was collecting his tool case, his posture unchanged, as though he were not entirely certain the response had been for him. "What is your name?" she said. "Illy," he said. "Illy Runningwater. How long have you been playing?" He considered this the way he'd considered everything, without hurry. "Since I was about 4, he said. "My grandmother taught me. She said music was a language, and every language should be spoken where it belongs." Constance Farrow was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "This hall belongs to it. Would you consider coming back?" He looked at the piano again, that same complete private look. "Yes," he said. He said it simply, the way a person answers a question they have been waiting a long time to be asked. I shook his hand before he left. It is not something I do lightly, and I am not a sentimental man, but 31 years of music tells you when something is the real thing, and the real thing deserves acknowledgement. His grip was firm and unhurried, the way his playing had been. He opened the gala 2 weeks later. I was in the 5th row again. The hall was full that night. When the program notes were read and his name called, there was a polite, uncertain ripple of applause. The audience did not know him, which was, of course, the whole point. He walked on stage in a dark jacket rather than the canvas work coat. He sat at the Steinway with the same naturalness as before. He played the same threshold crossing, the Dvořák, the door held open, and then the thing that had no name but which was entirely his own. By the 3rd phrase, the hall had gone very still. By the end, no one was sitting. I have thought about that afternoon many times since, about what Coyne said, and the silence that followed it, and the specific quality of certainty in a room that has already made its decision, and how, quickly, when the first note landed, that certainty emptied out and left something truer in its place. A language, Eli's grandmother had said, spoken where it belongs. Alderton Hall, it turned out, belonged to it completely. It just needed someone to say so.